A 72-year-old librarian, fired after 50 years at the Library of Congress, told a local reporter her life's work felt erased by Trump's layoffs. She never imagined Denzel Washington would use a Hollywood awards stage to make her life's work a national cause. Before the broadcast of the Kennedy Center honors had even concluded, the clip was already a seismic event online. It wasn't a gaffe or a scandal. It was a deliberate, perfectly aimed statement that sliced through the political noise. News channels broke into their programming to show the moment on a loop. Social media analytics charts spiked, showing Washington's name eclipsing every other topic. Within an hour, the phrase, "burning the book," was the #1 trend globally, a line of prose that had instantly become a rallying cry. In living rooms across America, phones lit up with text messages from friends and family, all saying the same thing: "Did you just see Denzel?" 3 days before the broadcast, the mood inside the White House was one of bullish confidence. The second term was proceeding exactly as planned. The One Big Beautiful Bill Act had consolidated budgetary power, and the administration was now executing its vision of a leaner federal government. The latest phase involved significant staff reductions across departments deemed non-essential to the president's core agenda of national industry and security. A memo, authored by a young, ambitious domestic policy advisor, was circulated to cabinet members and leaked to a friendly news outlet. It praised the bold streamlining and specifically identified archivists, curators, and librarians as relics of a bygone era. The memo's language was dismissive and clinical. These legacy positions, primarily focused on the storage of physical media, are obsolete in the digital age. They represent bureaucratic fat that must be trimmed to enhance efficiency and save taxpayer dollars. The president himself was delighted. At a press briefing, he told the assembled reporters, "We're cleaning house. It's beautiful. You have people sitting around all day with dusty books, costing you a fortune. We're putting that money back into the pockets of real workers." He saw no downside. To him, it was a simple matter of good business. In a quiet, sunlit apartment in Arlington, Virginia, Eleanor Vance was not feeling efficient. She was feeling hollowed out. For 50 years, she had walked the halls of the Library of Congress. She started as a page at 22. Her hands trembling as she handled first edition Mark Twain novels. She rose to become a senior archivist in the manuscript division. Her life's work dedicated to preserving the delicate, handwritten letters of Civil War soldiers, the unpublished notes of great American poets, the fragile documents that formed the nation's memory. Her termination letter was impersonal, a single page citing workforce restructuring under a new executive directive. Her final day was a blur of cardboard boxes and quiet goodbyes from younger colleagues who looked at her with a mixture of pity and fear. A young man who ran a small, independent D.C. political blog asked for a few words as she left, carrying a small box with a framed photo of her late husband and a potted fern. She hesitated, then spoke, her voice steady but laced with a profound sadness. 50 years, she said, looking back at the magnificent Beaux Arts building. You pour your soul into preserving a story, our story. And then one day, a memo declares you obsolete. It's not the job. It's the feeling that the work itself, the very idea of remembering, has been erased. The blog post was a small ripple in a vast ocean of political news. It was titled, "The Librarian's Lament," and it received a few hundred clicks, mostly from other librarians and history enthusiasts. But one of those clicks came from a screen in a home office in Los Angeles. Denzel Washington was preparing his remarks for the Kennedy Center honors. He was there to present the award to his longtime friend and collaborator, the celebrated director Spike Lee. He had a speech prepared by his publicist, warm, funny, full of anecdotes about their shared history in filmmaking. As he scrolled through his news feed, a headline caught his eye. He read Eleanor Vance's story. Then he read it again. He clicked on the link to the White House memo, his expression hardening as he read the phrase, "obsolete in the digital age." He looked at the shelves in his own office, filled with books, histories, biographies, plays. He thought of the months he had spent in archives, poring over microfiche and original documents to understand Malcolm X, to feel the weight of Reuben Hurricane Carter's letters from prison. He thought of the texture of old paper, the smell of aging ink, the tangible connection to a life lived. He closed his laptop. The publicist's speech felt hollow now, disconnected from the cold, dismissive certitude of that memo. He knew Spike would understand. A new speech began to form in his mind. Not just for his friend, but for Eleanor Vance and the silent, vital work she represented. The Kennedy Center Opera House was a sea of black-tie prestige. The President and First Lady sat in the presidential box, smiling and waving. The orchestra swelled. One by one, the honorees were celebrated with tribute films and performances. When it was time to honor Spike Lee, Denzel Washington walked onto the stage. The applause was thunderous. He was an icon honoring an icon. He strode to the podium, a picture of effortless grace and dignity. The lights felt warm on his face. He could see the teleprompter screen glowing with the carefully crafted speech. He saw Spike in the audience, giving him a small, knowing nod. "Art is a conversation," Denzel began, his voice resonating through the hall. He followed the script for the first few lines, speaking of Spike Lee's courage, his unflinching eye, his unique ability to hold a mirror up to America. He taught us to do the right thing, to fight the power, to find the truth in the frame of a film. The audience, a mix of artists and Washington D.C. power brokers, was with him, captivated. He praised Spike's meticulous research, his dedication to getting the story right, from the streets of Bed-Stuy to the battlefields of Vietnam. And then he paused. It wasn't a dramatic, theatrical pause. It was a moment of profound stillness. He broke eye contact with the audience and looked down at the podium, as if gathering his thoughts. The teleprompter continued to scroll, unnoticed. In the control booth, a producer leaned into his microphone. "What's he doing? Is there a problem with the prompter?" But Denzel wasn't lost. He was changing course. He lifted his head, but his gaze wasn't directed at Spike Lee or the presidential box. It seemed to encompass everyone and no one, all at once. "The work of an artist, of an actor, of a director," he said, his voice softer now, more intimate, "is important. We tell stories. We try to find a little piece of truth and hold it up to the light for a couple of hours." He let that thought settle in the silent hall. But an actor's work is temporary. It lives on a screen. It's an echo. He took a half step back from the podium, his hands resting on its edges. "I was reading this week about a woman named Eleanor Vance. She just lost her job. She worked for 50 years at the Library of Congress." A murmur went through the audience. This was not part of the tribute. In the presidential box, the president's smile tightened. He leaned over to an aide, whispering something. Denzel continued, his voice gaining strength, each word carefully chosen. "Her job was declared obsolete, her work, and the work of people like her was called bureaucratic fat." He locked his eyes on the camera, transmitting the broadcast to millions. "The work of a librarian, an archivist. That's permanent. They aren't dealing with echoes. They are guarding the source. They protect the letters, the maps, the diaries, the original thoughts that become the stories we tell. They guard our story. They keep it safe from fire, from floods, from the ravages of time, and from the arrogance of the moment." The silence in the hall was now absolute, thick with tension. He had drawn a line. He had turned a celebration of art into a defense of history itself. He leaned forward into the microphone, his voice a low, powerful rumble of conviction. "When you fire a librarian, you're not cutting fat," he declared. "You're burning the book." For a full 3 seconds there was nothing. No applause, no sound. The political figures in the front rows sat frozen, unsure how to react. They had just witnessed a direct, elegant, and devastating rebuke of the administration, delivered on national television, with the president sitting just a few hundred feet away. Then, from the back of the theater, where the artists, writers, and musicians were seated, one person began to clap. Then another. Within moments, the applause cascaded through the hall, a wave of support that drowned out the discomfort of the politicians. It was a standing ovation, not just for Spike Lee, but for the principle Denzel had just so fiercely defended. He gave a simple, solemn nod, said, "Congratulations, my friend," to Spike, and walked off the stage, leaving a political firestorm in his wake. By the time he and his wife, Pauletta, were in the back of their car, his phone was vibrating incessantly. His agent, his publicist, friends, fellow actors, a torrent of messages was flooding his inbox. He didn't look at it. He simply stared out the window at the blurred lights of the D.C. streets. Pauletta reached over and placed her hand on his. "You know what you just did, right?" she asked softly. "I said what I felt was true," he answered, his voice weary. "It was true," she agreed. "It was also beautiful and powerful, and it's going to make a lot of powerful people very angry." He nodded slowly. "I know." The ride to the hotel was silent. The victory in the theater felt distant already, replaced by the quiet hum of impending conflict. When they arrived, his security chief met them at the entrance. "Mr. Washington, your publicist has been trying to reach you. The White House press secretary has already scheduled a briefing for tomorrow morning, and, sir, we've had to filter your public email and social media mentions. The volume is significant, both positive and negative." Denzel just nodded. He had expected it. He walked through the quiet hotel lobby, the weight of the night settling on his shoulders. This was the cost. The applause fades, but the consequences remain. Inside their suite, Pauletta turned to him, her expression a mixture of fierce pride and deep concern. "Denzel, you have to be careful." "I was careful," he replied, loosening his tie. "I didn't attack him. I defended an idea." "To people like that there is no difference," she said, "and idea that contradicts them is an attack on them. You stood on that stage and you defended the powerless. They will see that as a threat." He sat down on the edge of the bed, the exhaustion hitting him all at once. He wasn't just tired from the event, it was a deeper, more profound weariness. The fight wasn't over. It had just begun. He had spoken his truth, but now he would have to live with the echo. The threats, the political pundits twisting his words, the pressure to apologize or to double down was all coming. He thought of Eleanor Vance, the 72-year-old woman packing her life into a cardboard box. He had spoken for her, and for that, he had no regrets. But as he looked at the concern etched on his wife's face, he understood the personal toll of a public stand. The battle had been won on the stage, but the war for the narrative was just about to start. The next morning, the political world woke up to a new reality. Denzel Washington, a figure almost universally respected and largely seen as above the political fray, had entered the arena. The White House press secretary, a combative former cable news host named Trent Dodson, stood at the podium in the briefing room, his face set in a scowl. The questions came thick and fast. "Trent, what is the president's reaction to Denzel Washington's comments at the Kennedy Center Honors?" asked a reporter from a major network. Dodson gripped the lectern. "The president was, frankly, disappointed," he began, his voice dripping with condescension. "It's a shame that a night meant to celebrate American artists was hijacked by a wealthy Hollywood actor to push a political agenda. Mr. Washington, who has made millions of dollars pretending to be other people, apparently thinks he knows more about running the government than the duly elected President of the United States." Another reporter followed up. "But what about the substance of his comment? Is the administration's position that librarians and archivists are, in fact, obsolete?" "Our position," Dodson snapped, "is that we are making the government more efficient for the American people. We are cutting waste. It's the kind of fiscal discipline that elites in Hollywood, who live in a world of fantasy, simply cannot comprehend. This administration is focused on creating jobs for welders and pipe fitters, not wasting taxpayer money on people who dust off old books. It's a false choice, and frankly, it's an insult to the hard-working Americans this president fights for every single day. The briefing continued in this vein, a mix of personal attacks on Washington and a doubling down on the administration's policy. The strategy was clear. Frame Denzel as a disconnected, out-of-touch celebrity, and paint the issue as a choice between supporting real workers and obsolete bureaucrats. The conservative media ecosystem immediately fell in line. Talk radio hosts railed against the woke Hollywood mob. Cable news chyrons blared. Denzel's disgrace. Actor attacks president at awards show. Online, armies of trolls descended on any post supporting Washington, filling comment sections with vitriol and "what about ISMS?" The threats his security team had mentioned became more explicit, more menacing. Photos of his home were posted online with threatening captions. Denzel stayed silent. He canceled his scheduled press interviews for the Spike Lee film, not wanting the director's moment to be completely overshadowed. He spent his days at home, reading, talking with his family, and fielding calls from concerned friends. The pressure to issue a statement was immense. His publicist urged him to release something that would calm the waters, perhaps clarifying that he meant no disrespect to the president. "They're painting you as an enemy of the working class, Denzel," his publicist, a sharp woman named Mara, said over the phone. "They're twisting it. We need to get ahead of it." "There's nothing to clarify, Mara," Denzel said calmly. "I said what I said. The words are clear. If people want to twist them, that's on them, not on me." "But they're winning the news cycle," she insisted. "Right now the story is Denzel versus Trump. It's a political fight. We need to make it about the principle again." "And how do we do that?" he asked. "You do an interview, a big one. You sit down with a respected journalist and you explain your position, calmly and rationally." Denzel considered it, but it felt wrong. It felt like playing their game, accepting their framing of the debate. To engage in the back and forth would be to reduce his statement to just another soundbite in the endless, exhausting cable news wars. He wanted his words to stand on their own, to resonate beyond the political churn. He felt he had made his point. Now he needed the idea itself to find its own defenders. He didn't know where they would come from, or if they would come at all. He just had to have faith that the truth of his words was more powerful than the noise being generated to drown them out. For a week, the noise was all there was. The debate raged, but it was a one-sided shouting match. Denzel's silence was interpreted by his opponents as weakness and by some of his supporters as a missed opportunity. The feeling of isolation grew. The actor, a man used to commanding a stage, had become a quiet observer in his own drama. Then, nearly 10 days after the broadcast, the unexpected ally emerged. He was not a Hollywood liberal or a Democratic politician. He was Senator Wallace "Wally" Thorne, a retired, 8-term Republican from Wyoming, a man whose conservative credentials were unimpeachable. Thorne was a relic from a different era of politics, a Reagan-era institutionalist who had spent his career championing fiscal responsibility, a strong national defense, and the preservation of American heritage. He had been a quiet critic of the Trump presidency, rarely speaking out, but making his disapproval known through his silence. He had spent the week at his ranch in Cody, watching the news coverage with a growing sense of alarm. He saw a principle he held dear, the conservation of American history, being sacrificed for a cheap political talking point. He saw a good man being smeared for speaking a simple truth. So he sat down at his old oak desk and wrote an op-ed. He didn't send it to a friendly conservative blog, he sent it to the Wall Street Journal. The piece, titled "Conservatism is About Conserving," was published on a Thursday morning, and it landed with the force of a tectonic shift. Thorne began not by mentioning Denzel Washington, but by invoking Teddy Roosevelt and the creation of the national parks. He wrote, "The conservative instinct is not to tear down, but to preserve. We preserve our natural wonders because they are a testament to the majesty of creation. We must also preserve our historical wonders, the documents, artifacts, and memories that testify to the majesty of the American experiment. This is not a matter of sentiment. It is a matter of national identity. A nation that does not know its own story is a nation adrift, vulnerable to any fleeting ideology that promises a glorious future by erasing a complicated past. He then addressed the White House's policy directly. To label the guardians of our national memory obsolete is not a fiscally conservative act. It is a radically destructive one. It is the logic of the arsonist, not the builder. A welder's torch and an archivist's gentle brush are not in opposition. Both are essential tools for maintaining the structure of our republic. One builds its physical infrastructure. The other preserves its soul. To claim we can only afford one is to fundamentally misunderstand the nature of our country. Only in the final paragraph did he mention the actor. Mr. Denzel Washington, in his recent, much-discussed remarks, used a powerful metaphor about burning the book. The political class has spent a week attacking the man to avoid confronting his metaphor. They would do well to stop. Mr. Washington, an artist who has dedicated his career to exploring the American soul, has done the country a service. He has reminded us that our history is not bureaucratic fat. It is the living heart of our nation, and the men and women who protect it are not obsolete. They are essential. The impact was immediate and profound. The White House's narrative, so effective against a Hollywood liberal, shattered against the granite credibility of Wally Thorne. On cable news, the debate changed overnight. Trent Dodson's talking points about real workers versus dusty books suddenly sounded hollow and simplistic. Conservative intellectuals, who had been queasy about the administration's anti-intellectual stance but afraid to speak out, now had cover. They appeared on news programs praising Thorne's thoughtful intervention. A handful of Republican senators, when cornered by reporters in the Capitol hallways, mumbled their agreement with their former colleague's sentiment. The story was no longer Denzel versus Trump. It was now a serious debate about national identity, memory, and the very definition of conservatism. Denzel Washington saw his opening. But he didn't take the path his publicist had urged. He didn't book a high-profile interview. Instead, he did something quiet. The following Monday, 2 weeks after the Kennedy Center honors, he flew to Washington, D.C. He didn't alert the press. Accompanied only by a single aide, he walked up the steps of the Library of Congress. He had arranged a private tour. Not with the senior leadership, but with the archivists and librarians in the manuscript division, the colleagues of the recently fired Eleanor Vance. For 2 hours, he walked through the climate-controlled vaults. He asked questions. He listened. He gently held a sheet of Abraham Lincoln stationery, looked at the faded ink on a letter from a young soldier at Gettysburg, and spoke with a woman who was painstakingly preserving the original film reels of early American cinema. A junior librarian, a young man named Ben, nervously asked if he could take a photo. Denzel smiled warmly. "Of course," he said. Ben took out his phone and snapped a single picture. Denzel Washington, leaning over a table, listening intently as a librarian in her late 60s, pointed to a detail on an ancient map, her face alight with passion for her work. That afternoon, the photo was given to the Associated Press, with no comment. It appeared on news sites across the world almost instantly. The image was more powerful than any interview could have been. It was an act of solidarity, not of confrontations. It showed him honoring the very people the administration had dismissed. The photo depicted respect, curiosity, and humility. It was the visual embodiment of his statement. Later that evening, he released his final, definitive statement. It wasn't a video or a press conference. It was a simple, written text, released through his publicist to all media outlets. Over the past 2 weeks, it began, there has been a great deal of discussion about remarks I made at the Kennedy Center honors. I am grateful to the many people who have engaged in this debate, particularly to Senator Wally Thorne, for his wise and courageous words. My intention was never to start a political fight. It was to defend a principle. The United States is a story. It is a messy, beautiful, complicated, and glorious story. The people who work in our libraries, archives, and museums are not just employees. They are the keepers of that story. They are our national memory. They do not do it for fame or for fortune. They do it out of a deep and abiding love for the truth. A truth that belongs to all of us, of every political party, race, and creed. To Eleanor Vance, and to the thousands like her whose vital work has been dismissed, I want to say thank you. Your work is not obsolete. It is, and will always be, the foundation upon which we build our future. To the young people of this country, I urge you to visit these places. Go to your local library. Volunteer at your town's historical society. Ask your grandparents about their lives. Learn your story, because a people who do not know where they have come from cannot possibly know where they are going. This has never been about one actor or one president. It is about all of us, and the story we choose to remember and carry forward. The statement was final. It was unassailable. It took the high ground and refused to be dragged back into the mud. The White House issued no response. To do so would be to argue against the importance of knowing one's own history. The battle for the narrative was over. Denzel Washington had not only won, he had elevated the entire conversation, turning a political attack into a national lesson on the importance of memory. The news cycle moved on, as it always does. But the echo of his words and his actions had just begun to spread. In a small, struggling city in central Pennsylvania, Javier Morales scrolled through the news on his phone, slumped on the sofa in his family's cramped apartment. He was 17, a bright kid who was close to giving up. School felt pointless. His history class was a boring recitation of dates and battles that felt as distant as the moon. His guidance counselor was pushing him toward vocational training at the local community college, telling him to be realistic about his prospects. His father worked double shifts at a warehouse, and his mother cleaned offices at night. The idea of a future beyond the city limits felt like a fantasy. He'd seen the clips of Denzel Washington at the awards show. It was cool, but it felt like another fight between famous, rich people. It didn't have anything to do with him. But then he saw the op-ed from the old senator, and the debate on the news started to change. They were talking about what it meant to know your story. Then he saw the picture of Denzel in the library, leaning in, listening. It wasn't a celebrity pose. It was a look he recognized. The same look his grandmother had when she told him stories about growing up in her village in Puerto Rico. It was a look of genuine interest. He read Denzel's final written statement. The line that stuck with him wasn't about politics. It was, "Learn your story." Javier looked around the apartment, at the worn-out furniture and the stack of bills on the kitchen counter. His story felt like one of struggle, of dead ends. But then he thought about his grandmother's stories, about the great-uncle who was a musician, the aunt who organized workers at a factory. These weren't stories he learned in history class. They were his. The next day at school, he walked past the sign-up sheet for the vocational program. He kept walking, down the hall to the school library. It was a small, underfunded room, mostly empty. The librarian, a tired-looking woman named Mrs. Gable, looked up in surprise as he walked in. "Can I help you, Javier?" she asked. He hesitated, feeling a little foolish. Yeah, he said, shifting his weight. "You have books, right? About, like, the history of this town?" A slow smile spread across Mrs. Gable's face. "I think," she said, standing up from her desk, "we can find something." That first afternoon, Javier didn't find a grand, forgotten history. He found something smaller and, in a way, more real. Mrs. Gable showed him how to use the microfiche reader, a clunky, beige machine from another era. He scrolled through old editions of the Keystone Daily Chronicle from the 1960s. He saw grainy advertisements for car dealerships and grocery stores that no longer existed. He read about high school football games and town council meetings. It was mundane, yet fascinating. It was the texture of a time he had never known, in a place he thought he knew completely. He came back the next day, and the day after that, Mrs. Gable started leaving a small stack of local history books on a table for him. He learned that the abandoned factory on the edge of town, the one his father always cursed when they drove past it, used to be the largest employer in the county. It hadn't just closed. It had been the site of a bitter, year-long strike in 1982. He read first-hand accounts from the newspaper archives, the reporters detailing the angry shouts on the picket line, and the desperate pleas from families trying to make ends meet. He found a high school yearbook from 1983 and saw the faces of the strikers' children, their expressions a mixture of teenage bravado and hidden anxiety. History was no longer a list of dates. It was the story of the building his father cursed, the story of the kids who walked the same school hallways he did. His search became an obsession. He wasn't just doing it for a class, he was doing it for himself. He started asking his father questions, not about bills or work, but about the factory. His dad, surprised, started talking. He remembered the strike. His own uncle had worked there. "He lost everything," his father said, his voice quiet. "They broke the union, brought in new workers, and that was it. We never talked about it much. It was a time of shame." Javier felt a fire ignite inside him. It wasn't shame. It was a story of a fight, a story of people standing up for themselves, even if they lost. Why was this story buried? Why was the only reminder a derelict building that everyone looked at with bitterness? He went back to Mrs. Gable. "Is there more? Like, not just the newspaper?" Benting him. "Are there records? Photos?" Mrs. Gable's eyes lit up. This was the moment every librarian lives for. "I think there might be," she said, a hint of conspiracy in her voice. She led him to a locked storage room in the library's basement. It was cool and smelled of old paper and dust. Against one wall were rows of gray, unlabeled cardboard boxes. "The Historical Society folded about 20 years ago," she explained. "They gave all their files to the library. No one's had the time or the funding to go through them." For the next 2 weeks, Javier spent every afternoon in that basement. With Mrs. Gable's help, he carefully opened the boxes. He found boxes of photographs, curled and faded. He saw men with determined faces on the picket line. He saw women organizing a community kitchen to feed the striking families. He found a box of old union newsletters, typed out on onion skin paper. He found a list of every worker who went on strike. He scanned the names. And then he saw it. Morales, A. His great-uncle, Alejandro. The man his father said had lost everything. Javier held the paper in his hand. A direct, physical link to his own family's buried past. He knew he couldn't keep this to himself. This story belonged to the town. Inspired by the national conversation, he decided to create his own small archive. He went to the school's media teacher and asked if he could borrow a camera and a microphone. He started a project he called Keystone Remembers. He created a simple blog and a social media page. He posted the photos from the basement, along with captions explaining what they were. Then, he started interviewing people. He interviewed retired workers who had been part of the strike. At first they were hesitant, reluctant to revisit a painful time. But when they saw that Javier, a 17-year-old kid, genuinely wanted to hear their story, they opened up. They told him about the solidarity, the songs they sang, the fear and the pride. He recorded their voices, their memories, a living history that had been silent for 40 years. The project took on a life of its own. Other students got involved. The media teacher helped them edit the interviews into a short documentary. Javier's story, once a narrow path of frustration, was now a wide avenue of purpose. His grades shot up. He spoke in class with a confidence that startled his teachers. He was no longer just a resident of a struggling town. He was its historian, its storyteller. The project culminated 3 weeks after Denzel Washington's final statement. The Keystone Daily Chronicle, the same paper Javier had scrolled through on microfiche, ran a full-page feature on him and his project. The headline read, "Local teen uncovers the story we chose to forget." The article celebrated Javier's work and featured the photos he had unearthed. It ended by quoting him. "History isn't just in a museum in Washington, D.C., he said. It's in our basements, in our family stories. We just have to have the courage to look for it." The article caused a stir. The town council, facing pressure from residents who had been moved by the story, voted to place a small bronze plaque on the green space across from the old factory. It would commemorate the 1982 strike and list the names of the workers who had fought for their community. Javier's great-uncle's name would be on it. In Arlington, Virginia, Eleanor Vance sat at her kitchen table, drinking tea. A friend had forwarded her the article about Javier. She read it, and for the first time since she had packed up her desk, she felt a profound sense of peace. Her work hadn't been erased. It was alive. It was living in a quiet school library in Pennsylvania, in the hands of a determined teenager. The fire she had guarded for 50 years hadn't gone out. Its embers had simply scattered, and were now sparking new flames in the most unexpected of places. And in Los Angeles, Denzel Washington sat in his office, reading a script for a new role. He never saw the article about Javier Morales. He would never know the boy's name, or the story of the strike he uncovered. But he didn't need to. He looked at his bookshelves, at the rows of stories and lives bound in paper and ink. He felt a quiet satisfaction. He had stood up for an idea, the idea that every story matters. He had trusted that the principle was strong enough to find its own way in the world. And out there, in ways he would never see, it was doing just that. The lasting echo of his words wasn't thunderous applause or a victory in the news cycle. It was the quiet click of a microfiche reader in a small-town library, and a young man learning his own story for the very first time. What do you think? Is it our duty to remember the past, even when it's painful? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And for more stories about the people who shape our world, don't forget to like and subscribe.